So, this is the Samsung Galaxy S9, a very compact phone for these standards. But is it still worth it in 2022? Let's find out in this video.
The Samsung Galaxy S9 was introduced over 4 years ago in February of 2019. One of the last flagships with a screen under 6 inches, with it being 5.8 inches. With a 1440p AMOLED display, but of course a 60Hz panel compared to 90Hz, 120Hz or even above that for current flagships, but even mid-ranges. And another big difference is that there were no cutouts, simply because we had bezels back then. You had speakers, cameras, sensors and so on hidden in that. Till this day, this makes a lot of sense for me. No cutouts is really nice to have. It is also protected by both the front and the back with Corning Gorilla Glass. For my market we had the Exynos 9810 and of course for the USA and China you had the Snapdragon 845. In terms of RAM, you had only 4GB of it. When it comes to memory, you had either 64, 128 or 256GB of UFS 2.1 memory, supporting expandable memory as well via the microSD. We also had a 12 megapixel main sensor, and that's the only sensor, with a very handy feature that would be perfect for modern phones, but sadly only Sony uses that in their Pro 1. The dual aperture, switching between an f-stop of 1.5 and 2.4. And with it you could record videos up to 4K and 60 frames per second down to 720p and 960 frames per second. And of course you had electrical image stabilization and of course optical image stabilization. For the battery we had a 3000 mAh battery, small compared to modern standards, with of course a charging speed at 15 watt. Now of course, with this being released in 2019 and this being the phone of my brother's wife for some years, there are some things to note. The biggest thing is battery life, which simply isn't good anymore. Granted, it never really was good with the Samsung Galaxy S9 in all honesty, but if you buy a phone like this, without a doubt I would recommend swapping out the battery for a new one, because 3 or 4 years of use will leave that phone with a lesser performance when it comes to battery life. In terms of power, because of the CPU though, it performs really well. It's still a very solid phone. Yes, we can talk about the benchmark performance where it has 250,000 compared to some modern phones scoring over 1 million, so 4 times as much. But just in general experience, the phone is still smooth. You can easily play plenty of games and it isn't bugging out with just normal general use. However, if you want to play the most intense games, then yes, the Samsung Galaxy S9 will have a hard time, but I can easily assume that this will simply not be the case. I don't think people who buy this kind of phone are aiming for the best performance, but are looking for a good day-to-day phone. And the Samsung Galaxy S9 is that, apart from of course battery life as I stated before. However, sadly we do have a return of that horrible Bixby button on the Samsung Galaxy S9.
And I can tell you this much. I am definitely not missing that Bixby button. I'm glad it's gone. At least in this kind of form factor.
Now my car is a Volvo C30 from 2008. Now of course Bluetooth wasn't very relevant back then, therefore my car doesn't have Bluetooth. Here comes the headphone jack however. My Volvo C30 has a headphone jack right there, so I can use the 3.5mm headphone jack in my car. Now a lot of people might say, well, why don't you use a converter? Which I do also have, because some phones of course don't have a 3.5mm headphone jack anymore. But with that being said, it doesn't fix the problem. Especially in my car, I want the possibility to charge my phone while I'm using the 3.5mm headphone jack. And the problem is that if you use the USB-C, you cannot. So you have to pick and choose which one you want to do. Especially if you are on a longer trip, it is not beneficial to not simply have a 3.5mm headphone jack. And the Samsung Galaxy S9 still has it, and it works really well.
Now overall, the Samsung Galaxy S9 still has a stunning AMOLED display with a 1440p resolution, and it gets bright enough outside when the sun is shining on it. Granted, here in the Netherlands we don't have much of that, but still, In terms of use, it is still a really good display with no burn-ins as well.
And then we come to features. The Samsung Galaxy S9 had plenty of those, back when Samsung truly cared about giving you features instead of removing features, so you would buy separate ones. For one, you got a charger that was included. Granted, it was only 15 watts, but still, Samsung doesn't do much better these days. You got a 3.5mm headphone jack, with of course that included as well, something again Samsung has removed here as well. So that's a nice step back. Then of course you do have expandable memory via the micro SD. Right now, if you're not sure if you have enough with 128GB with files taking in more and more and more and more space, you cannot expand it. So you have to buy maybe the 256GB version or maybe the 512GB version. So yeah, definitely, in terms of features, the Samsung Galaxy S9 was pretty packed when it came to that. When these days, you have to question whether you get a complete phone or not. Yeah, and we still somehow defend it, including reviewers that basically say, move on. Even though it's all about making sure that you buy as much as possible from a set brand so they can make more money, not environment. Because for instance, the charger itself needs to be bought separately, that needs to be shipped separately, then that needs to be driven separately to deliver to your home in a separate box that you didn't need before. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Either way, S9, feature packed.
Now of course the camera setup is older. We can already tell that by having just one camera, where the Plus of course had that extra camera. But the Samsung Galaxy S9 simply had just that one camera, and a decent one of it. While without a doubt it can have struggles in, for instance, low light, it is still pretty capable in daytime use. Again, here it comes with pretty much everything you are used to from modern phones. It even has the possibility to record up to 4K and 60 frames per second. But let me show you some results of the camera in general with video and of course still shots, and you judge for yourself what you think of it.
So, is the Samsung Galaxy S9 still worth it? It sort of depends. It is of course not updating anymore to newer Android versions. This one has Android 10, where the latest upgrade is of course Android 12. That one is of course new, but it does mean that you won't see any updates anymore for the Samsung Galaxy S9, unless of course Samsung changes its mind and says, you know what, let's give this one an update, but for now there isn't any update coming anymore for the Samsung Galaxy S9. With that being said, apart from that, do I still think it's worth it? Yeah, somewhat. If you can get it for a right price, the phone is still very capable. You have a lot of modern features like wireless charging, a really solid display and of course a really compact design. Not to mention that you have a micro SD support and of course a 3.5mm headphone jack. Again, there's a lot to like about the Samsung Galaxy S9 still. For myself, I can see if you are in a situation where you just don't care too much about a phone and you don't want to have the latest and greatest, the Samsung Galaxy S9 is a solid offering. However, if you do want a phone that has, for instance, a better camera, then I would say probably not. It doesn't have the computational photography that we see on modern phones. And therefore, in certain situations where it's actually really difficult for the sensor itself, because these sensors are of course much smaller and it doesn't have the technology behind it with software and of course the hardware when it comes to the CPU and the sensor itself, then yeah, you can definitely tell it will be struggling a lot more than modern phones. Anyway, let me know what you think about the Samsung Galaxy S9 and whether you think it's still worth it or not, or do you still use it from day to day? Let me know in the comments below. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe and of course hit like and do all that stuff because there's more content coming out on this channel. Anyway, have a good one and talk to you guys in the next.